Imagine you are standing right in the middle of the Amazon. But as you look around, there are no trees.
Right, no jungle.
Exactly. There's no endless canopy of green blocking out the sky. Instead, you're just looking out across this stagnant, murky super lake. And it is deep. Like, we're talking 50 meters down in some places.
Yeah, that's massive.
So you're watching this dark, completely opaque water, and suddenly this monster erupts from the mud. It drags its prey under the surface with a bite force of 70,000 newtons. Just to, put that number in perspective, that is nearly double the bite force of a T-Rex.
Which is just staggering to think about.
It really is. Imagine having 3 full-sized pickup trucks stacked on top of you. That is the crushing weight localized entirely on a single tooth.
Yeah, and at that level of pressure, I mean, you aren't just biting flesh. You are fundamentally shattering the structural integrity of whatever you've caught. The bone doesn't just break, it essentially liquefies under that kind of localized kinetic energy.
Wow. Well, welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today, based on our stack of sources, is to explore this forgotten, frankly terrifying world known as the Pibas Mega Wetland System.
The ancient precursor to the modern Amazon.
Right. We're going to uncover the absolute nightmares that ruled this water, and then we're going to look at the cataclysmic planetary scale forces that built it and eventually just destroyed the whole thing.
Because, honestly, the fossil record from this period paints a picture of an environment pushed to the absolute biological brink.
Okay, let's unpack this, because usually when we talk about the Cenozoic era, the 66 million years since the asteroid wiped out the dinosaurs, scientists call it the age of mammals.
Right, the giant reptiles are supposed to be gone.
Exactly, and mammals take over the Earth. But in this one specific place, the mammals were definitively not in charge. In the Pibas system, reptiles reigned supreme. And here's the craziest part about the super lake. The water was so rich in suspended mud and sediment that visibility was just zero.
Yeah, the light was swallowed up inches below the surface.
Which leads to this terrifying question, like, what kind of biological weapons evolve when you can't even see the predator right next to you?
Well, that lack of visibility, it dictated the entire evolutionary arms race. I mean, everything about how these animals hunted, moved, and survived was built around the fact that they were operating in pitch blackness.
Oh, wow.
And sitting at the absolute top of that murky food chain was the animal possessing those 70,000 newtons of force you mentioned earlier, Purosaurus.
The ultimate apex predator of the swamp.
Exactly. You might think of it as this giant swimming killer, but Purosaurus was much more insidious than that. This was a gigantic caiman, measuring 9 to 10 meters in length.
Wait, like the size of a school bus?
Roughly the size of a school bus, yeah.
Yeah.
And weighing several tons. Its hunting strategy was terrifyingly patient. It would bury its massive bulk under a thick layer of mud in the shallows. And in the completely still water, only its eyes and nostrils would break the surface, basically camouflaging it as a harmless mossy rock.
Oh, that's incredibly creepy.
Right. It would drop its heart rate, taking incredibly slow breaths, just eliminating any unnecessary movement.
Just waiting for something massive, like a megatherium, those giant ground sloths, to wander by for a drink. They'd step into the water, completely blind to the fact that a multi-ton predator was quite literally the ground under their feet.
And when it struck, the biomechanics were just devastating. You see, the teeth of Purosaurus weren't designed to slice meat like a shark. Crocodilians actually cannot chew their food.
Because their jaws don't move side to side, right?
Exactly. So Purosaurus had a dense, conical teeth that curved backward. They were engineered to withstand extreme pressure, to puncture deeply, and lock onto the prey like a vice.
So they couldn't just bite a chunk off.
No, the goal was to use its sheer body weight to drag a giant sloth into the deep water and initiate the death roll. Because it couldn't chew, it had to drown its prey, clamp down, and rapidly spin its entire multi-ton body to create immense torsional shear. It literally twisted massive chunks of meat off the bone.
It's brutal. But, it makes me wonder, if Purosaurus was that big and that strong and just dominating the shallows, how did anything else survive in that water?
It's a great question.
It feels like an underwater mafia. You've got the supreme boss hoarding all the resources. Did the other predators just have to cower in the corners and stay out of the boss's way?
What's fascinating here is that the Pibas system didn't just create stronger, bulkier predators in a linear race for size. It forced intense specialization.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, the other predators didn't compete with the mafia boss because they abandoned his game entirely. If you're slightly smaller, you can't outmuscle a Porosaurus. You have to outmaneuver it.
So we get the specialists, because looking at the sources, there was another giant crocodilian that took a totally different path, right? Gryposuchus.
Yes, Gryposuchus was another titan, reaching over 10 meters long. But its skull architecture was radically different. It developed an extremely long, skinny, almost needle-like snout.
Which, I mean, that seems like a massive structural disadvantage if you're trying to wrestle giant sloths in the mud. A skinny snout would just snap.
It absolutely would snap, which is why it avoided heavy land mammals entirely. That skinny snout is a marvel of hydrodynamics. Think about the physics of dense water. If you take a wide, flat wooden board and try to swing it laterally underwater, the drag stops you almost immediately.
Because the water resistance is too high.
Right, but if you swing a thin, aerodynamic pole, it cuts right through. Gryposuchus sacrificed crushing power to eliminate drag. It could execute lightning-fast lateral strikes in the water, targeting fast, slippery fish that the bulky Porosaurus physically couldn't pivot fast enough to catch.
Okay, so Gryposuchus represents pure speed and precision, but then we have Morasuchus, which honestly looks like a glitch in the evolutionary matrix.
Yeah, Morasuchus is one of the strangest reptiles in the fossil record. We are looking at another massive crocodilian, 9 to 10 meters long, weighing around 4 tons. But its skull was wide, incredibly flat, and elongated. It resembled a giant duckbill rather than a predator's jaw.
And its jaw wasn't built for crushing or fast strikes. So how does a 4-ton reptile extract enough calories to survive with a duckbill?
The biomechanical consensus is that Morasuchus was a filter feeder.
Wait, really?
Yeah, instead of actively hunting, it would cruise slowly along a shallow, muddy bottom. It would open its massive, fragile jaws and literally scoop up huge volumes of mud. Its throat and jaw structure acted like a sieve, filtering out small fish, crustaceans, and mollusks from the sediment.
Like a reptilian baleen whale, just vacuuming the swamp floor. It completely sidesteps the violent arms race. But, you know, we can't talk about navigating this dark, muddy soup without talking about the animal that completely hacked the zero visibility problem, the Pepinista.
Ah, yes. Pepinista was a species of giant freshwater dolphin, roughly 30 to 35% larger than the river dolphins currently found in the Amazon. As we established, the mud swallowed all light. Eyesight was a useless biological expense.
So it hunted blind.
Completely blind. Pepinista developed a highly pronounced facial crest on its skull, which anchored specialized organs capable of emitting high-frequency acoustic pulses. It used echolocation.
Because sound travels better underwater.
Exactly. While mud blocks light, water is an incredible conductor of sound. Sound waves travel nearly 5 times faster in water than in air. Pepinista would constantly bombard the dark water with acoustic clicks.
And then they'd bounce back.
Right. When those sound waves hit the dense swim bladders of schooling fish, they bounce back, giving the dolphin a high-resolution, 3-dimensional acoustic map of its surroundings. It could weave through the dense, submerged forests and snap out fish before the prey even sensed a predator was near.
Okay, hearing all this, if I were a prey animal back then, surrounded by filter-feeding giants, speed-hunting needle crocs, blind echolocating dolphins, and a literal 10-meter mafia boss waiting under the mud, I would be done with the water. I'd just walk out onto dry land and stay there.
Well, you might think that is the logical move. Leave the death trap for solid ground. But in the Pebis megawetland, that assumption would be a fatal mistake.
Wait, I'm actively disagreeing here. Land has to be safer. At least on land, you aren't operating in pitch-black, suspended mud. You have a chance to actually see the predator coming. You have leverage to run.
Your logic relies on the assumption that there was solid, stable ground to run on.
Wasn't there?
No. The shores of the Pebis system were not dry savannas. They were a treacherous, constantly shifting labyrinth of flooded palm forests, sinking mud plains, and rotting vegetation. There was no clear boundary where the lake ended and the land began. It was a transitional nightmare, and predators evolved to exploit that exact instability.
So the nightmares just grew legs?
Quite literally. Consider Baranasuchus. This was a sebecid crocodile. The sebecids are a fascinating evolutionary branch because they completely abandoned the aquatic lifestyle. They didn't swim, they were strictly terrestrial hunters.
A land crocodile.
Yes. Baranasuchus was 4 to 6 meters long, but its skeletal structure was fundamentally different from the sprawling, belly-dragging crocodiles we know today. It had long, slender, muscular legs positioned underneath its body, giving it a semi-erect posture.
Which means it wasn't wasting energy hauling its torso over the mud. It could actually run.
It could sprint. That upright posture gave it incredible agility across the soft, unpredictable terrain. and it didn't hunt from the water. It stalked the murky twilight shores. It used the dense jungle cover and the dim lighting to launch explosive ambushes on land mammals.
That is horrifying. A 20-foot crocodile sprinting at you through a swamp. But it wasn't just the reptiles waiting in the mud, right? If you somehow dodge the sprinting crocodile, you still have to watch the sky. Or rather, the trees. Because the birds back then weren't exactly songbirds.
No, not at all. The terrestrial ecosystem was deeply contested by the forest wrasses, commonly referred to as terror birds.
A name they clearly earned.
Without question. These birds stood 2 to 2.5 meters tall. They had heavy, compact bodies and thick, heavily muscled legs, built for chasing down prey across the mudflats. But their defining evolutionary weapon was the skull. They possessed an enormous, heavy beak that curved sharply downward at the tip.
Like a biological pickaxe.
Yes, and the biomechanics of that beak are incredible. They didn't peck or bite like a modern eagle. Their neck muscles were immensely thick. They would run down a mammal and then use those neck muscles to swing their massive, heavy skull downward in devastating axe-like strikes.
Just hammering their prey.
Exactly. The beak was designed to pierce deep into the flesh, specifically targeting the brain case or snapping the spinal cord of their prey. A single, well-placed blow would instantly drop an animal.
Okay, so if I'm a prehistoric sloth, I'm fighting a two-front war. Death from the death-rolling Purosaurus in the water, and then death from the sprinting crocs and axe-wielding birds on the mud. How did anything survive? For this ecosystem to function, there had to be prey animals, otherwise the predators would all starve to death.
Well, the prey didn't try to outrun the predators. They out-armored them. The evolutionary pressure in Pevis pushed defensive biomechanics to the absolute extreme. The perfect example of this is Stupendomies.
Giant turtle.
Stupendomies possessed a shell that was nearly 4 meters long, and the animal weighed over a metric ton. They deliberately navigated the murky, shallow waters right near the shore, which, as we know, is exactly where Purosaurus liked to wait in ambush.
So they were basically walking, swimming tanks driving right into enemy territory.
They were, and the fossil record proves they clashed constantly. Paleontologists have uncovered massive Stupendomies shells bearing deep, violent bite marks and structural fractures that perfectly match the jaw architecture of Purosaurus.
The mafia boss actually tried to crack the tank.
Repeatedly. A Purosaurus would clamp its massive jaws onto the edge of the shell and attempt to initiate a death roll. But the bone density and curvature of the Stupendomies shell were specifically evolved to distribute that 70,000 Newton force.
So they didn't break.
The fractures we find belong to adult turtles that live to heal. The armor held. They were hunted relentlessly, but they survived. To make the wetland even more chaotic, there was also Caninemes. This was a predatory turtle, but instead of hiding in a shell, it developed thick, powerful, curved jaws.
Don't tell me to crack open other turtles.
Exactly. It used immense bite force to crush the shells of smaller mollusks and turtles, tearing right through their defensive armor.
It is just relentless. Every biological mechanism is dialed up to 11. But, this raises a massive question for me. I'm trying to picture the map of South America. How did this literal monster movie set even come to exist in the first place? And where did it go? Because today, the Amazon is a flowing river surrounded by dense rainforest, not a stagnant million-square-kilometer swamp full of terror birds.
Right, to understand the rise and fall of Pevis, we have to zoom way out. We have to look at planetary geology. The creation of this environment was driven by plate tectonics on the western edge of the South American continent.
Wait, I'm trying to picture this. If the Nazca tectonic plate is sliding under the South American plate on the western coast, that means it's pushing the land upward. It's building the Andes Mountains.
Correct.
But if the mountains are rising on the coast, that means the entire drainage system of the continent just hit a wall.
That is exactly what happened. For tens of millions of years, ancient rivers flowed freely toward the Pacific Ocean in the west. But as the Andes rose, they acted as an impenetrable geological dam. They strangled the continent's water flow. The water backed up, pooling into a massive geological depression east of the mountains. Rainwater, river runoff, ancient aquifers, it all flowed into this basin and had absolutely nowhere to drain.
It formed a continental-sized bowl.
A bowl that, at its peak, covered over 1 million square kilometers. That is an area larger than the entire country of modern-day Japan.
Just 1 million square kilometers of stagnant, murky water. But, water alone doesn't make a caiman grow to the size of a school bus. There had to be something else fueling this system.
The fuel was the atmosphere itself. Between 17 and 14 million years ago, the Earth entered a geological phase known as the Miocene climatic optimum. Global average temperatures were 3 to 4 degrees Celsius hotter than they are today. Atmospheric CO2 levels were incredibly high, oscillating between 400 and 600 parts per million.
So the whole planet was just a massive greenhouse.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the biological implications of that heat are staggering. Mammals are endothermic. We burn a massive amount of our caloric intake just to generate body heat and maintain a constant internal temperature.
Right.
That metabolic cost put a cap on how big mammals can easily grow in certain environments. But reptiles are ectothermic. They're cold-blooded. They rely entirely on the environment to heat their bodies.
Oh, wow. I see where this is going. If the environment is permanently hotter,
Then the reptiles don't have to burn calories to stay warm. In a world that is 4 degrees hotter, with constant humidity and 0 winter seasons, a reptile's metabolism runs on absolute overdrive. Nearly 100% of their caloric intake goes directly into continuous, monstrous physical growth.
so the heat basically removed their biological speed limit.
Exactly. The PBIS system acted as a planetary-scale incubator. The heat, combined with a massively expanded food chain fueled by the greenhouse climate, removed the biological size limits for these cold-blooded predators.
So high heat plus 0 energy spent on warming themselves equals a 10-meter Purosaurus. The mechanics of that make perfect sense. But obviously, the incubator didn't last. The Andes kept rising.
They did, and eventually the geological dam became absolute. The mega wetland was entirely blocked off from the west, but millions of gallons of water were still pouring into the basin from rainfall. The pressure was immense. The water had to find a new path of least resistance.
It couldn't go west, so it had to break east.
Yes, the entire hydrological system of a continent was rewritten. The backed-up water finally breached the eastern boundaries, carving a massive new path right across South America toward the Atlantic Ocean. It drained the stagnant PBIS system, washing away the murky super lake and replacing it with a continuous, fast-flowing river.
The birth of the Amazon River.
The stagnant super lake was flushed out, the massive specialists lost their environment, and in its place, the modern Amazon basin emerged. A flowing network that today covers over 5.5 million square kilometers.
It's incredible, an ocean of green that currently holds roughly 10% of all known species on Earth. 40,000 plant species, 3,000 types of fish. It is a gigantic biological machine built directly on top of the grave of this ancient super lake.
It demonstrates the profound, transformative power of geological shifts over deep time.
Yeah, when you look at this kind of deep geological time, it really shifts your perspective on the present. We're talking about millions of years of continental collisions and extreme climate optimums required to build the Amazon rainforest we know today.
And that deep time perspective is critical right now because the sources we reviewed highlight a deeply alarming modern reality. Current environmental data suggests that almost 47% of the modern Amazon is approaching a critical tipping point of ecological collapse.
Almost half the system. That's terrifying.
And the fundamental difference is the velocity of the change. The geological reshaping from the PBIS Lake into the modern rainforest took millions of years, allowing life to adapt. The pressure we are currently applying to the Amazon through rapid global warming and industrial deforestation is happening in a matter of decades.
We're doing it in a blink of an eye, geologically speaking.
Exactly. We are placing an unprecedented amount of sudden stress on a system that is incredibly complex, but ultimately fragile.
We are essentially hitting fast forward on the exact kind of massive environmental shifts that wipe out ecosystems. We were watching geology and biology happen in real time right in front of us.
The history of PBIS proves that no ecosystem, regardless of how immense or seemingly permanent it appears, is immune to collapse when the underlying conditions change.
Which leaves you with this thought to mull over. We talked about how we can use this deep dive to open some unprecedented dialogues about the Amazon's fragility. But if the slow, natural rising of the Andes Mountains was enough to completely kill off a 1,000,000 square kilometer super lake and transform it into a rainforest, what exactly are we turning that rainforest into right now? If the Amazon, as we know, is pushed past that tipping point in the next 100 years,